Hello, folks. Today we are going to go ahead and get started thinking about how we're going to process the data that was generated from the KAP survey that you all wrote and provided to the other Bio 3501 class. And to do that, the very first thing that we want to do is get ourselves oriented relative to the data set that was produced, the way that it's organized, and how we can do a little bit of tips and tricks for visualizing that data in Excel before we do our processing over in R. So let's take a look at the data set that I've got on my screen here. Now, right off the bat, you're going to notice that it is a chunky data set, right? If I scroll over here, you can see that it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on, which may initially seem a little bit overwhelming, but what we're going to see is that it won't be, because not all of this data is going to be relevant to your research questions, and we're going to work through a process of how to identify the relevant data, eliminate all of the unnecessary data, and only work with that data that is directly relevant to the questions that you were asking based on your focal disease. Okay, so let's start out with the way the data is organized. So this data has all been de-identified. It is fully anonymous relative to the people who took this survey. You'll see that each row represents an individual respondent and all of their answers for every question. And in this survey, we had a total of 92 people complete the survey. Now, you'll notice based on the gaps here that not everyone provided answers to every question, and that's okay. It just means that for certain variables, your sample size may be a bit more limited. Okay, so I've got each row representing an individual person, and then each of the columns represents a variable. Most of the socio-demographic variables are concentrated at the beginning portion of the survey. For some of them, you can see the entire header there because it's brief, like gender, for example, or highest level of parental education. For others, since they're a bit longer, you may have to click to see the whole thing. So for example, in column C here, I've clicked on that top cell, household income of guardians if not financially independent. Another way that you can visualize those longer ones, if you'd like to, is that you can just click that first row to highlight it, so all of the column headers, and then if we go up here, this little button right there that I'm hovering over that says wrap text, what that does is basically wrap that text around so that it's not all in one big row. Now, of course, you'll notice that because my columns are pretty narrow, that makes some of them kind of ugly to look at. So another thing that we can do is just expand that column width out a little bit, and if I just hang on, let me fix that. If I highlight all of my columns, which I'm just going to go over here real quick, like I said, it's kind of chunky, highlighting all those columns there, and then I just pull it over to however big I want that width to be. It applies that to all of the columns simultaneously. And then, now that I have all this blank white space up here, I just click on that row, and then I can just do a double click there to make it the appropriate size. So now at this point, even without clicking on that and having to look up in the text bar here, I can now see what all of those variables are. Okay. So like I said, most of the socio-demographic variables are organized at the beginning of our survey here, and then we get into a little bit more specific ones about your individual diseases, like do you believe malaria is a serious health risk? If you were traveling, would you see? How likely do you think you would be to contract malaria? But a really important organizational feature of the way that this data set is currently set up is that all of the single response questions are at the beginning of the survey. So when we scroll over all of those questions that don't have any highlighted color associated with them, all of those up till this one right here, how likely is the cost of healthcare to influence when you decide to seek treatment for symptoms? All of those ones from column AY and over to the left are single response questions. When we get over to the further side of our data set, though, all of the questions with a highlighted color associated with them are multiple response questions. So you can see I've got that column header for column AZ highlighted, and it says, which of the following are symptoms of malaria? Select all that apply. What I've done for you to make it a little bit easier to process this data is that I've broken out everybody's individual responses, so I don't know, or potentially multiple selected, so you can see this participant selected fevers, chills, headaches, nausea, etc. And instead of leaving it in one big list that would be really difficult for you all to process, what I've done is broken out every individual response option into their own individual column. So you can see here all of these yellow yellow columns that I've got here are all individual symptoms of malaria that individuals could select from when they responded to this survey. To help us keep organized with which individual columns are associated with each select all question, I've highlighted each individual question and all of the options in a single unified color. So you know all of the individual columns associated with this question, which of the following are symptoms of malaria, will also share that golden highlight. To further help us keeping those questions organized, I've also given a header that generally describes the goal of that broader question for each individual item. So for example, for this one, since it's all about malaria symptoms, every individual response item is not only specified, but given that precursor, malaria symptoms, colon. Okay. And so then for each individual symptom, what I've done is broken out people's responses to each selection item individually. So for example, this top respondent selected I don't know. Since that's the only thing that they selected, for every single malaria symptom that you can see here that is not I don't know, the response for that individual participant is not selected. Since they did select I don't know, that is what's marked as selected for that respondent. Now, if we look down here at this third respondent who put all of these different things, fever, chills, headaches, nausea, and vomiting, etc., they have a selected response for every single one of those individual items that they selected. For all those that they did not select, for example, they did not select a runny nose, that gets a not selected designation. Now, we'll talk about why that's important later on when we get to the point of recoding these individual items as contributing potentially to knowledge, attitudes, or practices score. But for now, we're just orienting ourselves to the data. Now, what I've done for every single one of those select all that apply is that exact same process where I've color coded them and given designators for each individual item that I've broken out into a separate column. And you'll see that we've got quite a few of those, all of which have individual designators, all of which have different colors, and all of which have already been broken out for you into each individual's response for every single item. Now, I have also left that original question with everybody's compiled responses there, just so that you can see that relationship between the question as a whole and the individual breakout that I've already provided for you. Okay, so that was our quick little video on getting ourselves oriented to this data set. You will need to go into Carmen where this data has been posted for you under the appropriate module. Make sure you get it downloaded to your computer because you're going to be working with this data file in the next few videos to make sure that we've identified the relevant data items and then to start processing individual data items that might need a little bit of modification as we recode them based on knowledge, attitudes, and practices. All right, so go ahead and continue through that worksheet and I'll get ready to guide you through the next stops. All right.